I don't know, am I Terminator or am I Star Trek? Is this a positive thing, this technology, or is this negative? That I'm not sure about. It's a tool, but I also believe something about humanity that is not entirely optimistic. I'm a little bit cynical about humanity and their motives and their ability to take something potentially good and make something very, very terrible out of it.
Recent science fiction does seem to focus a lot on classicism and the dangers of like governmental demise. Yeah. Usually painted in a way that makes conservatives look like fascists.
Yeah, that's right.
That seems to be the consistent, which obviously is a trope and is boring.
We have no problem using ChatGPT to tell us what to believe about certain things. It's like, maybe let's be consistent and be a little bit skeptical.
I'm Brandon Briscoe, and welcome to The Postscript, Living Faith Bible Institute's weekly podcast and YouTube series that invites listeners into in-depth theological conversations with pastors and missionaries, scholars, and professors from LFBI. Artificial intelligence has become a powerful lens through which our assumptions about reality are being exposed. As machines increasingly mimic human reasoning, language, and creativity, they force uncomfortable conversations to the surface. What actually defines personhood? Is intelligence merely computational, or is there something irreducibly spiritual about the human mind? Can meaning, morality, or belief be generated by algorithms alone, or do those things require some form of transcendence? These are the kinds of questions that sit at the heart of the AITheist series, where technological progress becomes a testing ground for theology, not just innovation. To help us explore these tensions, we're joined today by Michael Svigel, professor of theological studies at Dallas Theological Seminary and author of the AITheist trilogy, these books right here. Through a blend of narrative fiction and serious theological reflection, Dr. Svigel invites readers to examine how artificial intelligence challenges Christian claims about the image of God, belief, and divine authority. His work doesn't take sides in the technology debate. That's not really his focus, but he does call people to think clearly, biblically, and faithfully about what it means to follow Christ in an age of intelligent machines. And along the way, he provides a series of apologetics that help those who are searching for faith. And so with that, I want to welcome Dr. Svigel onto the show. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Man, I appreciate your time. It's Christmas break. You're getting ready to go back into a new semester.
That's right.
And so I know you're busy ramping up. Probably have to submit your syllabi for the semester. I don't know if you've done that.
They're
kind
all
of thing.
done. I'm ready. I'm in a better shape than I've been in for many semesters, so we're good.
Man, that's great. And so how long have you been teaching at Dallas Theological Seminary?
It's about 19 years now. I've been teaching systematic theology, historical theology. I'm the chair of the theological studies department there, so I have administrative responsibilities too. So you're right. It gets ramped up pretty quickly and comes in like a storm.
Each semester is like that.
Yes.
Man, I totally understand. This is your first time on the show, and so I wanted to take a minute for you to kind of share your story with our listeners, how you came to Christ, what your discipleship process, your sanctification processes look like, and how you ended up at DTS writing books. We want to hear about your life and who you are.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you the short version of it. I grew up in northern Minnesota, the Iron Range of Minnesota. If any of your viewers are familiar with Minnesota, I came to Christ out of a liberal Lutheran upbringing, and then I kind of rebelled against that and dabbled in Scientology in my 16, 17 year age for a little bit, kept getting deeper and deeper in that. And my high school English teacher at the time confronted me on that. He was a regular public school teacher, but he was a bivocational pastor. And through a long series of complicated events, he ultimately led me to the Lord and began discipling me. So I kind of came to Christ around age 17, 18, was baptized and immediately felt the call into some kind of ministry. Writing was kind of part of my early upbringing anyway. My friends and I would write stories and pass them around school, and they were mostly, campus satire, making fun of teachers and students, et cetera.
Yeah.
I got in trouble a few times for it. But I went to Bible college, Philadelphia College of Bible. It's now called Cairn University. And then from there, went to Dallas Seminary. I also met my wife along the way, and been married over 30 years now. And I came to Dallas to go to seminary and did not plan to stay, but ended up being encouraged to go into academics and teaching, and did my PhD in historical and systematic theology, theological studies. My primary area of my ministry career academically is in patristics, so early church. So that's my main area of scholarly work. But I've always done writing. I actually was originally in college. Before I went to Bible college, I was in community college here and worked on writing, had a class in science fiction. In fact, I've always been a big science fiction fan, classic science fiction, Asimov, Heinlein, Ray Bradbury, etc. And so that's always been kind of a part of my life in the background, always been writing, creative writing, etc. People say, how did a theologian become a science fiction writer or a fiction writer? And I said, it's actually the other way around. I started out in writing, trained in that area, creative writing, storytelling, and moved into fiction. So this kind of dabbling in fiction writing as well as academic writing has been able to pull on several different past experiences and bring those two together.
Well, I want to make sure that by the end of the episode that you familiarize the listeners with the other things that you've been working on, because
Sure.
You've got a lot of really great books and you've contributed to a lot of great academic books as well. But I think it's super interesting, and I think it's really appropriate for Christians to be writing fiction. To me, it seems natural. I mean, in order to believe in Christ, you have to have, I think, a really broad imagination, ability to capture in your mind that there was a man that lived 2,000 years ago,
right,
that laid his life down and rose from the dead. And what we believe is kind of fantastical to begin with. And I think what it does, it can, if we allow it to, is kind of open our imagination a little bit and give us the ability to think outside of the box and have ideas that other people aren't having, and to theorize about things that other people aren't theorizing. I think Christianity does a wonderful job of sparking healthy imagination. And so it seems appropriate to me that you would be kind of bringing your Christian faith and fiction together, right?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. If storytelling, imagination, thinking of what could be, that's the thing about science fiction I've gravitated toward rather than fantasy. Science fiction is projecting a plausible future. That's kind of the idea, where fantasy is acknowledging from the start, we're going to create rules that can't possibly exist in this universe. So science fiction is speculative, of course. It's amazing, though. Anybody who's been around long enough can see things that used to be science fiction that are reality now.
Right.
Like, cell phones and these kinds of things. I remember reading stories back as a kid about this kind of technology, and it can become reality. In fact, it can motivate developments in those directions. So stepping out of that and just in general, thinking about the world as it is, Christians have the ability, because of the message of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and looking forward to the future. We have an ability to imagine how things could be. Right. And begin to work toward those things, not just in our own lives, but in the lives of others, and in hope of something better. And I think that's the scripture itself sparks the imagination.
Yes, absolutely.
It's end times and apocalyptic literature, especially.
Which is a lot of what you write about, right?
Yeah, exactly. And some of my other, less fictional writing.
Yes, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. So your books, the series, the AITheist, which is always hard for me to say, 1, 2, and 3, right? They are kind of a mixture of literary fiction and a bit of this kind of prophetic speculation, and then also apologetics. And I'm really curious about what made you decide to write these books. Like, what brought you to this place of all the things that you could write fiction about? How did you land here? And I've got a bunch of other questions related to that as well, but I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I can't remember what originally sparked the idea. I usually have about 10 different plot and story ideas floating around in my mind at all times, trying to figure out what to do next. But maybe 6, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I thought, it'd be interesting if a computer became convinced of Christianity and then didn't know what to do with this. I'm just a computer, but I'm sentient and I wish I could be saved, but I know I can't. And, more very narrowly focusing on the anthropological issue of here I'm a sentient being, but I don't have a body and I can't I'm not really, Christ hasn't died for me, but I believe this, and that sort of thing. And I thought, well, that's very narrow and not very interesting. I thought they would call in this pastor to kind of shepherd him and do pastoral counseling, and that kind of sat there in sort of this quasi interesting, but there's no plot or conflict there. And then at one point, I can't remember exactly what triggered it. I thought, well, what if I make the person come in to convince him otherwise? And part of that, and most viewers won't be familiar with this, but there's a book by Graham Greene, early 20th century British author, one of my favorites, called The End of the Affair. And it has that same kind of idea where a lady is trying to get somebody to convince her that there is no God because she wants to, continue in her lifestyle or whatever. It's a very interesting concept. The opposite of evangelism, convince a believer otherwise. Right. And kind of when I latched onto that, I thought, well, that has an opportunity to bring up a lot of apologetic questions, a lot of classic arguments against and for Christianity or theism in general. And that became more interesting. And so when I'm interested in something, it prompts me to actually work on the thing. And I actually wrote that thing on the airplane to and from Germany on a trip I take every year to teach. On the airplane, in my notes app, on the cell phone, which I thought was kind of appropriate. So just thumbed it out, and it was, obviously edited it, et cetera, after that. But it was interesting to me, so I figured it would probably be interesting to some other people. And it gets to highlight a lot of these themes that you mentioned. The existence of God, struggles with faith, struggles with doubt. What motivates? Is it simply facts that motivate Christian faith, or is it much deeper than that?
Yeah. With that, I think it'd be good for you to share with us the storyline of actually what's going on. So you've got this main character, Michael Berg, who's a professor a lot like you. Yeah. So there's probably some similarities, right? You could relate to him in some ways, who falls out of faith and then is met with this opportunity. So can you just walk us through the storyline and give us some insights as the story carries along? Sure.
Yeah. The first book is basically, when this sentient computer, YAR, which is unlike anything out there today. So the AI falls very, very short of that. And we can talk about my opinions about that later. So it's fictional. It's a sentient AI, a self-governing, self-thinking being that comes on the scene, begins to kind of run the world benevolently, and basically through a various set of events, is convinced that theism is, God exists, Christianity is true, and begins obsessing over this whole Christian faith thing. And it starts slowing down the system. So everybody's life is becoming affected because of this. So the designer calls in a theologian who had become an atheist to basically engage in dialogues with this sentient AI system to convince him, or try to convince him to abandon the faith, or at least lessen his fervor so he's not distracted by it. And then what goes on is conversations back and forth as Mike Berg tries to attack the faith, and in the process, basically Yar exposes the holes in his own reasoning and arguments and motivation for doubt. So that's, I don't want to give too much away. Right. Because it goes in a couple different directions, but it's, that's the basic outline.
Yeah. And so then as the series continues, their relationship continues, it takes twists and turns. Sure. It's fantastic. And not only that, I mean, I held the books up earlier, but they're not super long reads, right? So, but so you could easily read one in a week, or even if you had a lot of time, you could probably read one in a day. But all of them together kind of paint a really interesting picture with really nice twists and turns that for me, again, like I mentioned to you off air, that even that third book as a parent was really interesting, right? It touched me as a Christian parent who desires to see his kids grow in the faith and follow after Christ, but also wants to give them free will, give them space to explore their doubts. And Christianity is wonderful, unique for that very reason, because it allows that kind of question asking. And that the way that you tell that story was just so good for me, and reminded me of how important faith is. And so I love the story, and each book kind of represents a different facet of Christian interest, which I think is really great too.
Yeah, I didn't originally plan on writing a sequel. In fact, I remember doing an interview very early on the first book, and somebody asked, is there going to be a sequel to this? And I said I can't imagine that there will. I can't imagine where I would go with this story. And then that kind of hit me, this idea, and I explained that in the author's notes at the end of AITheist 2.0. So I had a plot, and it motivated me to do a second one. And then I wasn't sure if I'd be able to do a third one. Everything comes in threes, it seems, these days. And as you just described, a different dynamic. If I could come up with a different plot, a different dynamic, something that wasn't just, let's have more apologetic conversations, that wasn't interesting. But I could turn the light and shine on a different aspect of the Christian faith and the Christian life. The third one is really more about, okay, we got the facts straight. Now, how does this actually work in real relationships in the real world? And what happens when it doesn't seem to be working? And those kinds of themes that we all as Christians, and especially you mentioned Christian parents, because parenting is a big theme in that third one.
Mm-hmm. But you don't fail to include apologetics in all of them.
Correct.
Like in that third one, Yar is faced with a whole new series of dilemmas in his relation to the world, but also he's contending for the faith in kind of a new way. He's platformed in a new way. It's really interesting in the way that you kind of speculate, but the story is full of protagonists and antagonists. Okay, and in the second one, there's probably the clearest antagonist in the entire series is Nero, who decides to take on the kind of persona of Marlon Brando.
Yeah.
So he kind of speaks with this kind of intimidating Marlon Brando accent, but he's quite the character, and he causes a lot of problems. And so you portray AI as both the protagonist and antagonist, which I feel personally was really important to the storyline. And I'm curious, how did your own views about artificial intelligence inform the way in which you did that? And do you see the advancement? I mean, you had to speculate both ways, right? So like Yar is obviously kind of this positive influence in the world. Nero was not. You had to kind of speculate both directions on how things might go. And I'm curious about what your personal views, your theological views are about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say that, much, not all, but most science fiction, at least since the 70s, has projected a very pessimistic and dim view of the future, dystopic, and technology generally plays, the same role it plays in Frankenstein. Humans create this thing and then it turns into a monster. It's the Jurassic Park theme. It's Alien. It's all of these different things where humans mess everything up and unleashes the beast. And I think the technology, especially like if you think the Terminator, for instance, intelligent technology goes bad. The Matrix, intelligent technology goes bad. And I thought, I want to project, at least in that first one, a different kind of theme. That technology, when you add the basic morality of the Christian faith, can be positive. So my super intelligent AI system, Yar, is a benevolent character. And in many ways, because of the way the world is depending on him and his ability to run things so well, which is seen kind of as a weakness for humanity, but still, he's taking on the responsibility of, in a sense, a benevolent dictator, in a sense, which he becomes uncomfortable with in the second book.
If he can have conviction, he's convicted about that.
Yeah, he's like, that's a problem. We're robbing people of their humanity, he says, which is a little bit of a pull the curtain back and see what my views are already. I think, not a single dabble into AI was used to write these books. I can't say that about everything out there. And people are being cheated from the opportunity to imagine, to think things up, and to experiment in different directions by just asking AI to do it for them. And I'm seeing that more and more and more, which I think is a big, big problem in the
especially
future.
As a professor,
Yeah. So in the second book, I create this what basically people think AI is going to be with Matrix and Terminator is this malevolent being, sentient being, sort of, There's a twist there, but he takes it though in different directions. He's not non-religious. He's just religious in a way that is extremely deceptive. So he becomes you're almost a satanic type character. And then our protagonist, Mike Berg, who is spoiler alert, he's come back to the faith in a sense, kind of halfway there, and he has to confront the radical evil of this system. So you see a literal kind of black and white contrast between the first and second book, which is reflected in the covers. So yeah, and then the third one takes it a little bit different route.
Well, and I think it's really interesting, the idea that, okay, so what would AI do with all the information in the world? Right? Like when it gathers the information, obviously human beings interpret it differently. Right? When they gather the information, there's different forms of interpretation that lead either people to become atheists or to be believers. And then even beyond that, which faith do they choose? Right? Which faith system do they decide to subscribe to? And it's really interesting that for Yar, he get, much like you deal a lot with history and the theology in history. He kind of gathers a lot of historical evidence alongside biblical evidences, and he kind of lays things out. He gathers all of the data points, and he comes to an intellectual, computational decision that the Bible must be a divine book, and that Jesus Christ, because of that, Jesus Christ must be the Son of God, and that is the faith system that makes the most sense. Where Nero, because of his programming along the way, takes the same data points and chooses to de-emphasize those for the sake of other data points, and he ends up in a different direction. It's just like the way human beings work, but with all the information available in the world. And I think it's such an interesting idea that a computer could have determined such things, had come to conclusions on such things. And I want to hear more about that and some of the things that you were thinking about when you wrote that.
Yeah, let's just be honest. The whole thing is a metaphor for human experience, right? This is that's the great thing about speculative fiction, science fiction, is it's all, I've written on a little bit on science fiction as a genre. And I teach a class at Dallas Seminary called Theology and Science Fiction. It's an elective. So we speculate on this kinds of things. What is it and what's a function? In science fiction today, what I call it is postmodern apocalyptic. So if you think of the ancient world, the way I'm not talking about biblical apocalypse, I'm talking about non-canonical apocalyptic writings. What they do is they take a look at problems, moral problems or political problems or whatever, existential problems in the world, and they create these future-oriented, apocalyptic, visionary narratives about how things could be, or the judgment of the bad things, or they're fictional ways of how these things come to an end, or how they're going to play out in the future for a moral purpose. They're metaphorical. They're trying to promote changes of thinking or action, and I think that's how good science fiction functions. Good fiction in general, but good science fiction, it does something like this. It creates this metaphor for us to ponder really our own humanity, our own existence, our own choices. So when you take a look at Yar, who comes to these conclusions based just on the facts, but then has to kind of wrestle with the feeling aspect of it. He's sometimes unsensitive to people's feelings about the matter, which comes out very much in the first one. And it's really this question for us. We have rational aspects of our faith. We have a mind, we have emotions, we have will, and those don't always align. And sometimes I believe things. Sometimes I think about some of the things I believe as a Christian. I think I kind of don't want to believe that. It's kind of absurd to, if I step out of myself and then I think, but I have this, I can't explain it. There's an element of mystery here, that all of these things of mind, emotion, will, and all of these things, our experiences work together in the life of faith. And so in the second one as well, he's kind of putting things together. There's more we find out behind the scenes motivating his approach and the way he puts things together. But isn't that always the case?
Yes.
It's the question that kind of prompted the third book. The conflict in the third book was I sat down with somebody one time years ago, and he was a twin. And he said, I asked him, I can't remember how we came up with this, but his twin brother, did not believe, was a total opposite of him and with regard to faith. I said, why do you think that is? Why do you think you believe but he doesn't? And his response was, I must be smarter than him. He reduced it to, right? We laugh because we know that's
right.
Maybe that's true, but that's not why, he reduced it to merely the ability to analyze and add up and synthesize the data and come to the right conclusion. And that's just not true. That's not true.
Right. Yeah. I mean, our lives are filled with experiences, and there's got to be kind of conviction associated with a spiritual thing that's happening. Like you're either drawn in or through your experiences, or you have a series of rejections that put you further and further away from the truth. And these are all free will decisions, but at the end of the day, I mean, it's either humility or pride, right? Like, and we choose one or the other. And I think that that's a really, fascinating aspect that both Michael Berg and Yar are working through in each of the books. And walking away from it, the thing I realized is that Stacy is the only consistent, redeemable character.
She's the best.
She is the best. Yeah. His wife, ex-wife, wife, again,
right.
Man, she's such a wonderful character. And she functions kind of like an innocent, faith-filled person, right? She's almost like the spiritual guide to the entirety of the books, which is also wonderful.
I have to admit, she all of the characters are based on, they're kind of mongrel characters based on different things. Nobody is one person, but Stacy is very much, I mean, some of the conversations between Stacy and Mike Berg are not too dissimilar from some of the conversations my wife and I have had, so it's she is that in my life, and
a lot
I'm very,
of us
very
need
thankful for that. Yes, that's for sure.
Yeah, a lot of us who read and think too much need wives who are like, hey, you're reading and thinking too much.
Yeah.
We need that in our lives, someone to settle us and ground us back in the simplicity of the faith.
Yep.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to the show. We're going to pause right here for just a second so we can hear from one of our students from the Living Faith Bible Institute.
My name is Blade Spiza. I'm from Living Faith Lee Summit in the Kansas City, Missouri area. And I just want to share a little bit about LFBI. It feels like a commercial, and I don't want it to be that. I actually want to speak to you just as an individual who loves God and wants to serve God and give your life to Him. LFBI, though it may seem academic, is actually an opportunity for you to have an intimate walk with the Lord. And you go through discipleship, you get involved in ministry, and as you continue to grow, God gives you stuff, and you begin investing in people. And a lot of times, as you begin investing in people, you fail to get fed yourself. And so I know for me, as a growing leader in ministry, I've found seasons in my life that are really dry, and LFBI has been amazing for me just to be reminded about how awesome the Word of God is and how faithful God has been and how perfect God's Word is for me. And I would just encourage you this semester to take on a little bit more. Maybe you're thinking, I don't have time. I'm so busy. I feel like I'm just doing too much. I want to encourage you that LFBI doesn't have to be academic. You can actually approach God's Word devotionally in that time and trust Him to speak to you in the quietness of a classroom setting. If you're on the fence about LFBI, I just want to encourage you to get started by signing up for a class. If you've never done it, I encourage you to hop in maybe to a Bible survey class or foundations. If you've been doing LFBI for a little while and you understand the workload, take on a little bit more. Step out in faith.
To enroll for classes, visit lfbi.org. To support LFBI, please visit lfbi.org/support. So, okay, I told you this, that my next door neighbor is what you would call a digital optimist. And in fact, he's very engaged in this community. He's written his own fictional stories and published books related to this idea that AI is actually good and is trending in a direction that could provide us with solutions to world hunger, solutions to war and famine, and it could provide us with cures for diseases. And if we simply entertain it and coach it the right direction, that actually what we have in AI and robotics and transhumanism and all these other things that are continually elevating themselves in our world, that all of this is true, and it connects into even his view of the universe and aliens, and it's phenomenal that he's really worked this direction. I found it very interesting, and I think really helpful for me in my friendship with him to be able to offer him a book that actually was Christian, and yet didn't have a dystopian take, at least out the gate, on AI. It made it very easy for him to access. And I think that's true for a lot of probably atheists, right? So like, I think a lot of atheists are looking to technology for answers because they're not finding them in faith, right? So they're really hoping for the best outcomes in terms of progressivism in the world. And they're looking for that. And I think you provided an entry point by not presupposing that AI is necessarily wicked, at least in terms of your narrative. And I think that that's so important. And I wonder if if you've acknowledged that yourself, or if you've run into other people who've suggested the same thing.
Yeah, so my personal attitudes towards AI, especially as an educator, as a theologian, as a creator, content creator, I have mixed feelings, to be honest, about it. I really want to be optimistic about it. And I do think the potential, if it is developed in the right direction, the promise of this kind of computing ability, if it can get to that point and overcome some of its inherent structural weaknesses, like the ability to analyze and synthesize data, et cetera, and save years of work in cancer research, et cetera. I think that there are possibilities there that are acknowledged. I think I want to acknowledge that. When my students use it to write their papers or come up with, ideas that completely basically lets them off the hook of actually thinking, I think it's bad. It's taking away things that are, and then with the way the large language models right now, the way that AI works is not good. I'm just telling you, as far as like analyzing very set data, it's great at translating a modern spoken languages. I mean, amazing. I'm fluent in German. My wife is from Germany. So I've been over the years comparing, 5, 6, 10 years ago, the way the AI, all translations is AI driven now. It was pretty bad just 5, 6 years ago, and now it's almost perfect. I would say you can run it through Google Translate something, and it's about maybe tweaking here or there idiomatic phrases. So there's some things where it's really, really, really good, and in some things where it's really bad. And if you can indulge me in just like 1 minute, I'm going to give you an example because I keep testing this as a scholar. So I had, a screen open with the Apostolic Fathers. Again, patristic studies is my work. I was doing a word search and wanted to see how this term was used in the Apostolic Fathers. And so I had the actual data sitting up on my screen. And then I asked, I might as well just say it was ChatGPT, to do the same word search that I was doing. And I said to provide me with the all of the occurrences of thlipsis, this Greek word, in the Apostolic Fathers. And of course, it dutifully provides a list. In fact, the Greek text itself, it's putting it on there. And I thought, well, that's amazing. And then I look at the first one, I'm like, gosh, that doesn't seem quite right. I don't ever remember reading that passage ever. And then I realized it totally made stuff up, like totally made it up. And I went back and forth with it, and it finally admitted that it doesn't look up these texts. It just guesses what probably should be there. And then I'm going to read you what it finally said at the very end. It said, to be blunt, all bold, it said, no one should cite me for lexical data, period, ever, period. Not students, not pastors, not scholars. At best, I am a secondary aid. At worst, as demonstrated, I can mislead if treated as an authority. You caught the error because you actually know the text. Many readers wouldn't. That is precisely why this kind of mistake is serious. Okay. If you think of a student who doesn't know, or you're going to AI to create a summary of something, it doesn't know. It doesn't have wisdom. It's like a line in the AITheist where I think Rami says, the creator of Yar says, Yar or AI is rational. It's not reasonable. Right? There's a difference there. And so it's extremely dangerous. I could give you example after example of AI these resources, getting it completely wrong, and there's no way you would know it's wrong unless you already know it.
Right.
So I'm unfortunately having to still, at this stage in its development, put the large language models of AI, where it's kind of predicting what the best word should be in the sentence. I'm going to put that in the category of it's good at reminding you of things you already know, or synthesizing very, very specific data. Take this paragraph and reduce it down to half the size. It's not really good at teaching you things because it's very, very unreliable.
No, I mean, I've run into the exact same problems, not in the same realm of study, but even just in terms of trying to get ChatGPT to do basic categorization of words found in English and or Greek or Hebrew, where I can't even quite. I was so frustrated with it. I have at times that I haven't even gone to look at why it's doing what it's doing. But you discover, wow, like, no, that term isn't used 43 times. I know how many times it's used because I already did the study, and it's just wrong, right? So
yeah,
I think this is a huge thing for students. So the Living Faith Bible Institute has the same issue. How do we keep students from falling prey to the temptation of using this? And I think that there are technologies that are coming out to help us combat that as educators. But it is a difficult thing, and it's day by day. I think in the realm of education and teaching, we have to continue to watch the technology to see what it does in order to best know how to address it with our students.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure you're running into that.
It's here to stay. There's nothing we can do about it. I am at the verge of basically disallowing it entirely for any use in any of the assignments that, written assignments, et cetera. Just say there's no acceptable use of any of these things, because the reality is, as you're writing something in Word or whatever, it's using it anyway for your spell checks, for your, all these things. It's behind the scenes. Nobody can shun AI because it's being used when you're shopping for something on Amazon. I mean,
right.
It's just working behind the scenes. So I think that's probably where the future of AI is going to be, unless they come up with a better model that can actually think, which has its all. And I don't know. I'm not one of these doom. I don't know. Am I Terminator or am I Star Trek? Is this a positive thing, this technology, or is this negative? That I'm not sure about. It's a tool. But I also believe something about humanity that is not entirely optimistic. I'm a little bit cynical about humanity and their motives and their ability to take something potentially good and make something very, very terrible out of it. So,
well, you're a pre-trib, premillennialist, so you gotta you have to have a realistic view on where things are going, right? So, with that in mind, I do want to ask you some questions about on your ontology and what you believe about what the Bible says on these issues. One of the things that I keep, terms are so important, definitions are so important. I keep hearing you use the word sentient, as it refers to Yar. I often hear the word autonomous, sentient, conscious, these words being used sometimes the same or different from one another. I tend to believe the word autonomous is more like what Yar is, where he's just a logical system, where sentience kind of implies consciousness a little bit. So here's my question. Are these things possible from your biblical worldview, right? Like, is consciousness possible? How is that different than soulishness? And what is your ontological view theologically?
Yeah, I'm going to have to say I have a big question mark there. I would say maybe it's possible that a human created computer system of some sort can be able to think in a way that is extremely rational and logical, and maybe as intelligent, I suppose, if you want to use that term, or autonomous, as a very intelligent animal in a sense. I hold two different treats in front of my dog, and he for some reason decides one over the other consistently. He just has a preference and makes a decision. So he's exercising will. He's conscious. But he's not definitely nowhere near the level of human consciousness and ability and volition and all of that. So I want to say that's probably as far as I would go from a theological anthropological perspective. I'm not sure that anything like what Yar is, and I don't actually answer the question, what is Yar? I think the closest I come is, somebody, I think Mike Berg asks Rami, is he really sentient, or is that just a marketing, claim? And Rami pauses and says, that Yar thinks he's sentient. That's all he knows. So, so I don't really answer the question, but I think the idea of autonomous making decisions, I think I'm going to decide to think about this now, or I don't want to think about that anymore. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to do this. That might be the case. I'm not so sure that such a machine would be as benevolent as Yar is.
Right.
Because I think that humans create according to their own image. And that image is at the moment not reflective of God's values and virtues and principles and priorities. So my fear is not the technology. My fear is the humans wielding it and creating it and moving it in their own directions.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to the show. We're going to pause right here for just a second so we can hear from one of our students from the Living Faith Bible Institute.
Hi, my name is Nathan Schrader. I'm a growing leader in our local church. I get to serve as a Bible study leader on our discipleship team and as part of the international student ministry. And I'm a student at LFBI. In 1 Peter 3:15, we see the command to be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you with meekness and fear. And in the pursuit of reaching the world for Christ, we're going to inevitably run into many people who have different beliefs and different cultures, and they're going to ask some really good and really hard questions. And LFBI has been an invaluable tool in my life to prepare me with an answer for those questions. And it's also helped me to understand what I believe and what I'm standing on. LFBI has been a blessing because it's not just teachers who are spouting off a bunch of knowledge to you, but they're true fathers in the faith who care for your soul and who desire to raise up the next generation of believers to be good soldiers who know how to handle the sword that they've been given well. For more information about LFBI and the Living Faith Bible Institute, please visit lfbi.org. And if you want to support the training of future pastors and missionaries, please visit lfbi.org/donate.
There's some really interesting things that are being said, particularly by men like Elon Musk and people who don't mind theorizing out loud. Things like that AI should be within the next year as smart as all of the greatest minds in every major field in the world, right? Statements like we won't have any need for phones within the next year or so, like that apps and phones won't even be necessary. Like I don't even know what that fully means. But that AI is going to basically meet those ends somehow, probably through some sort of integration. And I think that those kinds of things are the things that people are afraid of, obviously. Sure. And I'm curious, you mentioned Revelation 13. I think it's in the first book, maybe it's the second. And you kind of just toss it out there as almost like, hey, some Christians are talking about Revelation 13 and AI, and then you just kind of dismiss it. I can't remember the exact context, but I am curious what you think. If you were to speculate, as a theologian, but then also as someone who has the creative capacity of a fiction writer, what is happening in Revelation 13 with the image, the beast? We hold a similar eschatology, and so I'm curious what you might think of that.
Yeah, just a little upfront caveat. I'm just speculating here and sharing my opinion. I'm very, very careful about looking at current events and saying this is that or this could be that. So because I've been around long enough to see every single time it strikes out. So, but on I make in the context, I think it's in the first book, where there's a discussion about when this sentient AI system comes on board and starts taking over more and more things that some people say this is the Antichrist or the mark of the beast or the image of the beast, or trying to make it a fulfillment of end times prophecy, which of course in the book it's not. In the second book, Nero appears more to play that kind of antichrist-ish role, an antichrist of some sort, in the most in the most direct kind of sense. So in that you're seeing two ways of kind of looking at this and two potential paths for it. It could be nothing, but it could be something that is malevolent, and very, very harmful for humanity, even at the level of stealing our humanity from us, in a sense, excusing us from living out the image of God mandate that we have.
And by that, are you implying the mark?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure that I wouldn't go that far as to say this is, some sort of AI system in the future is going to be the image of the beast, and the mark of the beast being related to some kind of technology. It could be. It could definitely be. I could you don't have to be a science fiction writer to imagine that kind of scenario. It's all of the pieces are there to make that a reality. So if I were in the habit of writing, end times sci-fi, that would be a real easy plot to go into. So I would say we have to be careful. All we know is this: every single kind of technological development that has the potential of being good also has the potential of being used in very malevolent ways. And in the second book, without giving away any of the plot, there's also the dimension that I don't think we're thinking through as Christians, and that is the spiritual dimension, the spiritual realm, and what's going on there. We've kind of backed away from thinking about that. We're thinking about, here's the technology. Oh, and we believe these things too. We haven't really brought those two things together and asked what if. And I think that that's probably where maybe thinking in that direction can make that kind of a apocalyptic scenario much more plausible.
And by that, and sorry, I'm going to ask more questions about related to what you say. I don't want to give away the story, but are you referring to the idea that like the fear of technology kind of handcuffs us to the spiritual reality of the warfare related to whatever it is that is going on in the world? And so in other words, when Christians are faced with some sort of dystopian reality coming into fruition, we seem to lose track of the basic disciplines of our faith, such as prayer, study, evangelizing.
Sure.
Is that what you're referring to? Or is there something else when you're saying the two things coming together? What are you referring to?
So what I'm referring to there is, let me put it this way. If bad people will pick up technology and use it toward bad ends, what in our worldview as Christians, in our understanding of the way things work, what would prevent evil spirits, malevolent spirits to do the same thing? Okay. And then our recourse to, a wicked kind of technology that is under the influence of these, either directly or indirectly, it doesn't really matter, under the influence of these spiritual forces of wickedness in this present age. What do? I think we're so, we think dichotomies that there's the physical and there's technical, and then there's the spiritual, and we haven't really been good at integrating those things,
right?
And thinking that those can be really the same thing. Bad technology could be bad for us spiritually and even motivated by bad spirits.
Yes,
and I don't think we think we're so good at severing and creating separate categories. We need to think a little bit more holistically, if that makes sense.
No, it's interesting, because what you're saying is, especially in relation to Revelation 13, that we don't have a problem imagining a situation where the Antichrist, that the grievous wound is, is raised back to life and is somehow, brought together transhumanistically with AI technology. Like, we don't have a problem kind of hypothesizing about that. But what you're suggesting is that, well, what about the reality in our present day?
Yeah.
That these worldly systems, technology included, are inhabited by malicious and devilish forces even now. And so what are we going to do in response to the idea that we actually live in a world where the enemy is present, you know?
Yeah, it's like you just said, we don't have any problem imagining. Yeah, sometime maybe Satan could use, AI to promote, this one world dictatorship, the Antichrist. And then we acknowledge that, and then at the same time we have no problem using ChatGPT to tell us what to believe about certain things. It's like maybe let's be consistent and be a little bit skeptical about, let's approach things a little bit skeptically. But again, let me just back up and say, I have used, AI to good ends. There are positive benefits of it, and that's what makes it so difficult. It's gray in many ways.
Yeah. So you mentioned you teach a class where you deal with science fiction and the Bible and
theology and science fiction. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm curious, what are the required readings for that class for our listeners? But then also, what are some recommendations of your favorite science fiction that people might be interested in picking up, and if they haven't been familiar with it? I mean, a lot of us have heard. I'm sure that most of us have read 1984 and Brave New World or things like that. But what are some of your favorites, your specific favorites?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a whole lot, and most of them they're older. I kind of prefer older science fiction. So as far as the theology and science fiction course, it is taking a look at science fiction, and mostly secular, not all, but mostly secular science fiction, and reading it through from a Christian perspective and thinking through how is the world illustrating in what is the author trying to do here and communicate, and thinking about it critically. So we basically use short story approach in the week to week readings from this thing called the Big Book of Science Fiction. Real easy to find. It's an anthology, really, really well curated. So it goes through the history of science fiction from all over the world, different languages, etc. So we read selections from that. We also watch a couple sci-fi movies.
Fun.
There's one very little known film called Midnight Special, which is one that we have watched, and then a more popular film, The Minority Report, which is Stephen K. Dick, based on one of his stories. But Dick, his work is really, really good. It brings out a lot of questions of anthropology and theology unintentionally. So he also authored the stories that were the basis of things like Blade Runner, and which also the movies themselves bring up really interesting existential theological questions, especially the sequel. Even though Philip K. Dick wasn't part of that, it obviously is after he died. But that Denis Villeneuve did an amazing job of illustrating, asking the question, what does it mean to be human? So some of those kinds of things are really fun to talk about in a course like that. That's what we do in that course. It's an engagement with culture kind of course. As far as books, I've devoured, Isaac Asimov. Now understand, these are not Christians. Isaac Asimov was an atheist. But Isaac Asimov, Arthur C. Clarke, he was a little bit more open to bigger mysteries of the universe than Asimov was. So 2001, 2010, etc. And a lot of the books that he's done. Ray Bradbury was really good. Heinlein, some of these names. So from the classic, what's often kind of the golden age of science fiction, I really appreciated some of the work that's done back there. Those were the biggest influences on me. I've read more modern authors as well. And I remember when I first wrote my first science fiction novel called Topia, and then a sequel, Elegy, finishes the story. Those are full-length sci-fi novels. My agent was not impressed with Topia because he said it was just too heady, too cerebral, too philosophical, like old science fiction, like what Asimov and Clarke and Heinlein and such would do. And the advice was to make it more like the Hunger Games. And that's just You're
not interested in that.
Not interested in that kind of. So that's kind of where sci-fi is, in my opinion, today. So my approach is more the old classic sci-fi, where it's actually not afraid to deal with real philosophical, theological issues that Christians have a better answer for.
Yeah.
And that's what the kind of work I want to do.
Yeah. Contemporary recent science fiction does seem to focus a lot on classicism and the dangers of like governmental demise.
Yeah.
Usually painted in a way that makes conservatives look like fascists.
Yeah, that's right.
That seems to be the consistent, which obviously is a trope and is boring.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And the older guys seem to be focusing more on universal questions.
Yeah. I feel like that's the case, which is what Christians do. You know, we believe in a meta narrative. We believe in a world, and we believe in answers to the questions. You know, I think a lot of modern science fiction is very cynical. You know, you get through watching a movie and you're like, there's literally not a single good character in there. The protagonist was evil, you know, and it's just the cynicism. Yeah. You know, well, no, we're being realistic. No, you're being cynical.
Yeah. Yeah.
The world's not that bad.
Yeah. Right. Well, I do have a question. You mentioned Terminator.
Yeah.
Do you have many opinions about Terminator? Like as a movie, like about Skynet and the story. Like I recently watched it, and I had a real problem with there seems to be a narrative flaw in that I don't understand how John Connor can send Kyle Reese back into the past to meet Sarah Connor if he's the father of John Connor. And they call it it's a paradox. It's a loop in the story where there doesn't seem to be a beginning. And they call it the bootstrap loop. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but how do you feel? You are? Yeah. So what do you feel about that kind of
unavoidable.
device?
It's unavoidable. If you're doing any science fiction with time travel of any sort, there's no way to avoid the loop. So basically you just embrace the loop. You just embrace it. So my Topia Elegy Chronicles are time travel. And I have to, I can't get to the end of it, and it kind of confuses people. But it's the paradox of the cause becomes the effect, and the effect is the cause, and there's no way around it. So you kind of have to either create a plot hole, an inconsistency, or you just embrace the loop, and it becomes part of the plot device. And you use you use the loop to tell a story about people. You know, character driven story.
As a Christian, it drives me insane.
You're right.
It's not linear enough, right? It breaks the linear nature of a storyline, and I can't help but like it gnaws at me. So when the story is being told, it gnaws at me in a way that keeps me actually from focusing. On the other redeemable aspects of the story.
Yeah, and that's my problem with writing in science fiction, especially if you're going to do a time travel kind of theme. You do have to suspend, because I don't believe time travel is actually possible, but if you have to suspend, you have to create this new world with new rules, and you have to suspend your Christian worldview to a degree, and then use that new world like J.R.R. Tolkien does with Middle Earth to tell a metaphor and have elements in there that are reflecting themes. It's not really it's not speculative fiction as much as it is a world forging, So all time travel sci-fi is like that, and it's extremely, it's extremely dangerous to get into unless you do like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. What was Douglas Adams, where he basically says he relieves the loopness of it by saying all effects of time travel have already been accounted for in, time, space for all eternity. So you can do whatever you want. It's not going to change anything. It's just a total, he just punts and just says, here, I'm just going to play in this field and there are no rules, which is, everybody knows that's illegitimate. But yeah, you're right. So as I want to just warn, viewers that as they're reading Christian fiction, especially if they read my fiction, that is not, the characters and the things that go on do not necessarily represent what I actually believe reality to be. I'm creating this fictional world in which to really ask and answer other questions. So if you want to know what I really believe about things, read my nonfiction theology. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So let's talk about that a little bit. Can you share with us? You've written a lot of books. I've got a couple here. I have some others too. I just couldn't find them before I met with you. Your church history book that covers kind of these urban legends. This is a great book. This is a lot of fun too. And then also books that you've contributed to, like Evidence for the Rapture. This book as well is a really interesting resource lots of different authors involved in that. Very respectable group of contributors. But tell us about books like this and some of the books that you really are highlighting. Another book that I think is really important that we have here in our library at the school is The Fathers on the Future, which I'm sure took a lot of work for you to put together. Share with us about some of your most important books and why people might want to pick them up.
Yeah, Fathers on the Future. I'll start with that one. It's not the most recent, but almost the most recent. It's basically the effect of, almost 20 years of teaching eschatology. Also my patristics background, early church history, and taking a look at, here's what the earliest church fathers said about millennium, eschatology in general. And they have a pretty clear, consistent view. Let's go to scripture to see if these things are true. And for the most part, I say they are. They're premillennial futurists, believe in a 7-year tribulation coming, an antichrist. When they do talk about the rapture, which they don't almost at all, but when they do, it's open to something like a rapture as a rescue. We kind of have to go to scripture to answer that question, but they contribute something to that discussion. So that's kind of what that is. It isn't at a very academic level. I am coming out with a popular version kind of eschatology, arranged a little bit different way that my wife can actually get through. That was the standard. She gave up on Fathers on the Future at about chapter 10. But she's made it. She's making it so far. She's reading the first draft of that popular level one. So we'll present the same thing probably next year. That'll come out. Essentials of Christian Theology is another one that's come out that covers all areas of theology in a very, very practical way. In what's called what I call theologically vanilla, meaning I'm not taking a stand on the things that divide evangelicals and presenting what we all affirm, and then showing the various different views, and then leaving that up to you to decide. And then also the urban legends of church history. That is a great one. A lot of myths out there about what so-called events that happened that didn't. Yeah. Some of those are very important because especially claims by, non-Protestant traditions that just aren't true, demonstrably so. When events of history become a point of faith, I'm going to choose to believe, that Luke painted the first icon, for instance. That becomes a big problem. So we have to deal with history as it actually is, not as we want it to be. And every tradition is guilty of those things. So I do very high academic as well as very popular level things, as well as, try to hit that Goldilocks zone in the middle where it's intermediate. You're going to learn something, but I hope not to give you a headache.
Yeah, I highly recommend for our listeners. And so I do want to just thank you for being with us. I hope we can come back again at some other point and you can share some of the other stuff that you've written, maybe when this other book on history and end times beliefs, eschatological beliefs of the church fathers comes out. I would love to sit down with you and talk some more. But man, so thankful for the AITheist and those stories. And just really appreciate all the work you're doing at Dallas Theological Seminary.
Yep. Thank you so much for having me, Brandon. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you. And I appreciate you, the listener, for joining us for this episode of The Postscript, hanging out with me and Dr. Svigel as we talk about fiction and the writings that he's done. Hopefully that'll spark some interest in you and you'll want to go pick up one of his books or all of them and start listening and enjoy that, especially if you're interested in technology as well as apologetics. But we're grateful for your time. And if you realize while listening to the show today that you have an interest in growing in your faith, you desire to go deeper in God's word, and you want to be equipped for ministry, we want to recommend you visit Living Faith Bible Institute at lfbi.org. Check out our program of study, the classes that we offer. We offer those courses at a very, very inexpensive rate for the sake of those people who are working and trying to make it in the world. They just can't afford to go to an expensive seminary. We try to make the courses affordable for you, and we really want to train you for the work of ministry, right in your very own local church or on the mission field or church planting one day, whatever the Lord has for you in the future. But we love you. We're grateful for the time that you gave us today. And we can't wait to spend more time with you again next week for another episode of The Postscript. God bless.